$15 hit that auction block before the bidding was done, and what she whispered to the man who stopped it would cost him something no bullet had ever reached. Her name was Esther Vane. Summer, 1883, Crockett County, Texas. And the quiet stranger who put those coins down was the most feared gunslinger west of the Pecos, though you would never have guessed it from looking at him. If that story speaks to you tonight, partner, a woman who refuses to be merchandise and a drifter who cannot outrun his own name, subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. Stay until the very end. This one earns it. Now, let us go back to that counter. I have told a lot of stories by this fire, and I want to be honest about something before this one begins. Most tales I carry come to me clean. Hero on one side, villain on the other, justice riding in on a good horse and everything settling. This one is different. This one has lived in my chest for 40 years because the hero nearly broke over a whisper. And the woman he tried to free was the only one who understood in the end what freedom was actually made of. I was there, or near enough that it does not matter much. I will let you judge. The trading post at Sutter's Crossing had no right to exist, which was precisely why it did. It sat at the junction of two wagon roads that connected two places nobody much wanted to go, and it had been doing business of one kind or another since before the war. The man who ran it was Hollis Pike, and he had built the place himself, board by warped board, on land taken from a homesteader who died of fever before he could protest. You would not have thought Pike wicked if you met him once. He had a ready smile, a clean apron, a decent line of credit with the supplier in Abilene. He kept his fingernails trimmed. He paid his account at the territorial tax office on time and with exact change, which in that corner of Texas in 1883 was taken as a genuine mark of character. What Pike did behind the counter was a different accounting entirely. The post sat at the edge of a stretch of land known to the locals as the Breaks, hard and cracked country where the soil gave out and the rocks took over, where small ranches starved and failed and left behind women and children who had nobody to turn to and nothing to trade on. Pike understood this geography the way a buzzard understands thermals. He had been watching the Breaks for 2 decades and had developed arrangements with certain men, claim jumpers and creditors and failed fathers, arrangements that converted human misfortune into inventory. He never put a plain name to it. Labor placement. Settlement of outstanding obligations. He kept a ledger, precise and immaculate, and in that ledger certain names appeared next to certain dollar amounts, and when a name moved from one column to another, Pike took his percentage, and the matter was considered closed. Esther Vane had appeared in that ledger in the late spring of 1883. She was 22 years old, raised on a dry goods claim 20 miles east by a father who had borrowed from the wrong man. That wrong man was Chet Alderman, a rancher who ran fence and cattle and debt with equal enthusiasm. When Esther's father died of a burst appendix in April, Alderman rode to the claim on a Thursday morning, presented a note signed by the dead man, and informed her that she now owed him $380. She had a mule, $12 in coin, and a roof with a bad beam. Alderman had taken the note to Pike. Pike had assessed the situation in the way he assessed all situations, and by the end of May, Esther's name appeared in the labor placement ledger with an asterisk beside it. That asterisk meant transferable. She had been at the post for 6 weeks before the day this story happens. She slept in the back room on a corn husk mattress that smelled of mildew and mouse. She worked the counter from before sunup until Pike locked the door. She understood completely what she was. She was not naive, had never been naive. A woman raised poor in a man's country cannot afford that particular luxury. She knew what the ledger meant. She knew what it meant when certain men rode in and spent time talking to Pike in low voices and then glanced at her. She had filed all of it away in the careful part of her mind that she kept separate from the rest, the part that stayed cold and observed, the part that was still entirely hers. That is the only part that matters for this story. The summer of 1883 in Crockett County was the hottest in 12 years. The river at the crossing had dropped to a muddy trickle. The cattle were restless. The men who came into Pike's post were edgier than usual, hot and thirsty and short-tempered, in the way men get when country will not cooperate. 3 of them had been in the post since mid-morning on the day this story happens. Their names were Chet Alderman, whom you have already met, and 2 brothers named Vernon and Jack Foss, who hired on wherever they were needed and were never needed for anything that required a conscience. Alderman had gotten himself a drink and settled on a barrel near the window, watching Esther move behind the counter with the proprietary patience of a man looking at something he already considers his. The Foss brothers were playing cards near the door. They were not playing well. They were watching her too, the way men watch things they have been promised. Pike had a buyer in from over the breaks, a man representing a ranch operation known as the Whited Spread. This man went by Reese. He wore his hat indoors and had the sort of eyes that counted everything in a room and subtracted what he did not need. He and Pike had been in the back room for 20 minutes with the door mostly closed. When they came out, Reese looked at Esther, then at Pike, and put a number on the air. Alderman from his barrel offered a counter number. They were not bidding on grain. Esther heard both numbers from behind the counter, where she was tallying a receipt. She did not stop writing. She kept her face completely still. She had been expecting this moment for 6 weeks and had decided in advance that she would not give any of these men the satisfaction of seeing what it cost her. Her handwriting stayed even. The receipt tallied correctly. She set the pencil down without pressing hard. It was at that exact moment that the door opened and a man walked in. He was not anything to look at. That was the first and most important thing. He was somewhere on the wrong side of 40, lean the way men get lean when they have been hungry more than they have been fed, with a brown coat that had been good once and was not any more, and a hat that had seen all the weather West Texas had to offer. He had the kind of dust on him that takes days to accumulate. He moved through the door with a careful, even pace, not slow and not hurrying, and he went directly to the dry goods shelf and picked up a tin of salt and a small cloth sack of dried cornmeal, and he set both on the counter. His name, though none of the men in that room knew it yet, was Boone. Just Boone. He had left the last name somewhere in New Mexico in 1877 and hadn't missed it since. He looked up from his goods and he saw the situation, not all of it. He didn't know the specific men or the specific ledger, but he saw the woman behind the counter doing something careful with her face, while men across the room discussed her in numbers. It took him about 4 seconds to understand what the numbers were for. Boone was not, by disposition or history, an impulsive man. He had learned patience the hard way, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how badly things can go when you move too fast or too slow. He had spent most of the past 6 years trying very hard not to get involved in other people's troubles, and he had largely succeeded. The 6 years before that were the reason he was trying so hard. He set the salt and the cornmeal back on the shelf. He walked to the counter. He reached into his coat pocket, not his gun belt, his coat pocket, and produced a cloth pouch. He set it on the counter without ceremony. Whatever she owes. The room went still the way rooms go still in the moment before something changes. Pike looked at the pouch, then at Boone, then at Alderman. Reese had gone very careful around the eyes. The Foss brothers put down their cards. Alderman climbed off his barrel. He was a large man, and he used his size deliberately, the way a man does when he is accustomed to it settling matters. He crossed to stand beside Boone with the intention of looming, coming close enough that most men would have stepped back. "She ain't yours to buy, friend." Boone didn't look at him. He opened the pouch and counted out $15 in silver onto the counter, setting each coin down flat and unhurried, like a man paying for salt. "She is not anybody's to buy, that is the point. I am paying off the debt in the ledger. When that is done, she is free to go where she wants." Pike made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "There are parties with legal interest. Then I will pay those parties." Boone kept his eyes on Pike. "Show me the ledger." Pike did not move. Something was happening in the room, a kind of pressure, the way air gets before a storm, and Pike was experienced enough to recognize it, even if he was not experienced enough to understand its source. The source was the man across the counter, who had not raised his voice, had not touched his gun, and had not looked away from Pike for one single second. Whatever Alderman saw in Boone's face when Boone turned and looked at him made him stop where he was. The Foss brothers stood from their table. Vernon's hand moved toward his hip. It stopped there, because Boone's hand had moved faster to his own hip without appearing to move at all. Not drawing, just resting, one thumb hooked over the belt, and Vernon understood, the way certain men can understand certain things without being told, that he had already lost that exchange before it started. The room was very quiet. Esther, behind the counter, had stopped breathing. Boone turned back to Pike. The ledger. It took Pike 11 minutes to close out the account. He did it with the shaking hands of a man who has suddenly understood he is not the most dangerous thing in a room he thought he controlled. Reese left without saying goodbye. Alderman stood by the window for a few minutes, jaw working, then walked out. The Foss brothers took a little longer. They were the kind of men who needed to feel like they had decided to leave rather than been made to leave. But they went. When the room was empty except for the three of them, Pike turned the ledger around and pointed to where Esther's name had been crossed out. He tore the page, handed it to Boone, and said nothing. Boone folded the page and set it on the counter in front of Esther. He said one word. "Yours." Esther picked it up. She looked at it for a moment. Her name, the numbers, the fat black line through all of it. Then she looked at him. "What does this cost me?" Her voice was entirely level. No fear in it, no gratitude, no relief. Just the question, put forward the way you would ask the price of something at a market stall. She was already calculating. She had learned, over 6 weeks at Pike's Post and over a lifetime before that every transaction has a hidden price, and she was already trying to figure out what she was going to have to give this man in order to get through the next week. Just another man with leverage. That was the moment, partner. That broke something in Boone that no bullet in 20 years had touched, because he had expected gratitude, or at least shock. He had expected her to need something from him. He had expected, and he was honest enough with himself to admit this later, to be the hero in the room. And instead she was looking at him with the clear, measuring eyes of a woman who had learned that every man who arrived with something she needed also arrived with a bill to present, and she was already reaching for whatever she had to offer. Nothing, She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, then very quietly. People who do something for nothing want something for it later. I have learned that. He met her eyes. She was right to think it, he told her. He couldn't prove anything to her tonight. He was going to say at once. Nothing. And then she could decide what to do with that. He picked up his salt and his cornmeal and walked out the door. If you have been listening, partner, you already know what kind of story this is going to be. But I want to pause here for just a moment. Because right now, right at this exact point, most women in Esther's position would have made a different choice. Most women would have followed him immediately. Not out of romance, this is not that kind of story, but out of simple arithmetic. She had nowhere to go, no money beyond a few coins, no horse, no claim anymore. Following the stranger was the practical thing, but Esther did not follow him immediately. She stood at that counter for a full 3 minutes after he left. She picked up the torn ledger page. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket. She turned to Pike and, in a voice that did not waver at all, let him know she would need her things from the back room. Pike pointed. She went. Her things were a flour sack bag with a change of dress, a small Bible that had been her mother's, and a hunting knife her father had given her when she was 11, and that she had kept sharp every day since. She put them in the bag, tied the top, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Boone was sitting on the step of the post, his horse tied to the rail. Esther stood for a moment, taking stock of him the way she had taken stock of everything in those 6 weeks at the post, looking for the angle, the cost, the thing he wanted that he was not yet saying. She found, to her considerable discomfort, that she could not immediately locate it. She was going to Brackettville. There was a dressmaker there looking for help. He looked out at the road and pointed out that Brackettville was 40 miles, and asked about a horse. She didn't answer that. He scratched his jaw. He was going roughly the same direction for a day or two. She was welcome to walk alongside his horse. Not a transaction, he said, just geography. She studied him for a long moment. She had the kind of face that did its thinking openly. You could see the consideration moving through it, and what she settled on was something like, "This is still a risk, but I am calculating it deliberately, and I am choosing it with my eyes open." All right. Geography. They had not gone 3 miles before she asked what his name was, and when he gave it, just the one word Boone, she tried it out quietly to herself and did not find it told her much. She put a question about where he was from, and received the answer that he had been a lot of places, which was not really an answer at all, and he agreed it was not, and neither of them pressed further. If you are enjoying this story tonight, friends, this is a good moment to subscribe if you have not already. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you are, and what time it is there, whether you have got something warm in your hand. And if you know somebody who loves a good story from the Old West, pass this one along. Now, let us keep going. They camped the first night in a dry wash that offered shelter from the wind. Boone built a fire low and quiet, the way a man does when he does not want to advertise his position, and Esther noticed it. She noticed a lot of things about him that first evening. The way he checked the back trail twice before he sat down. The way his right hand stayed free even while he ate. The economy of his movements, nothing wasted, nothing performed. She watched him across the fire for a while before she put words to what she had noticed. The twice-checked back trail, the free right hand at dinner, The fire built so low a man had to know why. She named all three out loud, ending with the observation that most men don't build a fire that small unless they know what it means to be found. He said maybe he was just careful. She said maybe. Or maybe he knew what it looked like when someone was coming after you, because he had watched it often enough. He didn't argue. The fire cracked. An owl went once from somewhere south, testing the dark. A coyote made its climbing, wavering call out in the darkness, and another answered from farther away. She wrapped her hands around her tin cup and put the direct question to him. What had he been doing at Sutter's Crossing? He told her buying salt. She pointed out he had put the salt back. He agreed that he had. She said men who involve themselves in situations like that usually want something, and that it's rarely just the principle. I know the type, he said. I'm not surprised. He poked at the coals. A long pause. Then, without being directly asked again, he had stood by once when he should not have. A man he knew had the opportunity to step in and didn't, because it was easier to keep riding. By the time he came back, the damage was done. He would rather not be that man again. But you are that man, she said, not unkindly, just accurately. He agreed that he was. He was just trying to run a different account. She thought about that. Somewhere in the dark, the coals popped and sent a small tongue of orange flame up and then back down. Finally, she said she did not think he was the worst man she had met this month, and that was about the highest compliment she could honestly give a stranger at the end of the first day. He almost smiled. It rearranged his face in a way that made him look, for just a moment, like someone who had not been carrying something heavy for a very long time. I'll take it. The second day was longer and hotter, and they did not talk as much. Esther walked beside his horse for most of the morning, and Boone let her set the pace, which she appreciated without saying so. Around noon they stopped in the shade of a limestone outcrop, and he shared out some dried venison and hardtack, and they ate without talking. She had learned something at Pike's Post that 6 weeks of silence had deepened, that a person's behavior in the spaces between words revealed more than anything they chose to say out loud. She watched him in those spaces. He did not eat fast. He did not hurry in any of his movements, not the way a nervous man moves, and not the way a guilty man moves. When his attention went outward, it went to the horizon and the terrain, not to her, not in the way she had learned to watch for. It was the attention of a man monitoring for threat, not calculating for advantage. She was not ready to trust it, but she was noting it down. That evening she told him about herself, not everything. She was not a woman who handed out everything to a stranger on the second night, but enough. Her father. The claim. The debt she had inherited from a man who had trusted the wrong people. The 6 weeks at Pike's Post, tallying receipts and sleeping on the corn husk mattress, and keeping the careful, cold part of her mind separate from the rest. When she got to the part about running and being caught the first week, about what alderman had stood over her and said when they brought her back, she put it plainly and without theater, the way someone recounts a cost that has already been paid. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he put a log on the fire and looked into it. She wanted him to understand that she was grateful for what he had done. She was. But she had enough experience of people doing things for her, and then presenting the bill that she could not just receive it cleanly. You're supposed to do what keeps you alive. A longer silence. Then without preamble he asked what she had in her apron pocket when she walked out of Pike's Post. She looked at him carefully. My Bible. And a knife. Which were you planning to use? A long, quiet moment. The fire moved between them like a third conversation. Whichever one the situation required. This time he did smile, and it was different from the almost smile of the previous night. It was the smile of a man who has just been surprised by the world in a good direction. The way a man looks when he has underestimated someone and is glad of it. On the morning of the third day they woke to the sound of horses. Boone was on his feet before Esther had properly processed the sound, one hand on his revolver, moving to the edge of the wash and scanning the back trail. The dust cloud was distant, maybe a mile. 3 or 4 horses moving at a deliberate pace, not rushing, but not casual. Boone read the dust cloud as Alderman and the Foss brothers, most likely, with Pike having sent word the hour they left. Esther was already on her feet with the knife in her hand. She looked at the terrain around them, the wash, the limestone rise behind, a dry creek bed cutting east, and put a practical question to him about ammunition. He told her enough. He told her he wanted her in this wash because the angle from the limestone made flanking difficult without crossing open ground, and he asked whether she could use the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. "My father taught me," she said. He took it out and handed it to her. She checked the lever action the way someone does who has done it before, smooth and automatic. She asked what he planned to do. He pulled his coat aside, settled his holster, and looked back at the approaching dust. "Talk first," he said. That was always first. And if talking didn't work, then it wouldn't. What Boone did in the next hour, partner, was not what they write about in the dime novels. There was no dramatic speech. There was no showdown at high noon with the sun overhead and the whole town watching. What there was instead was careful and deliberate work, the work of a man who has done this before and has learned from every time it went wrong. He spent 20 minutes in the terrain around the camp, moving low and quiet, making use of the limestone and the wash in ways that I can only describe as architectural. He was building something, not a barricade, not a fortification, but a situation. He positioned himself where the riders would see him first, and see him clearly, a lone man standing in the open, but where the geometry of the ground gave him angles they would not immediately calculate. He sent Esther up on the limestone with the Winchester, and told her to stay flat and still, and not to fire unless he gave a clear signal, or a man pointed a weapon directly at her. She went without argument. Then he waited. They came over the rise at a slow walk, Alderman in front, the Foss brothers flanking, and behind them a fourth man Boone hadn't seen at the post, thick-necked and riding a gray horse. 4 men. Alderman was wearing his iron low, which meant he had dressed for this. Vernon Foss had a rifle laid across his saddlebow. Jack Foss and the gray rider both had hands resting near their belts. Alderman pulled up 40 yards out and looked at the lone figure in the open. "You picked a bad trail, friend." Boone stood easy, hands at his sides. "I was about to say the same." The exchange that followed was not long. Alderman laid out his position. The debt arrangement was legal, the interference was unlawful, the woman belonged to what he had secured. Boone laid out his. The debt had been paid, and Pike had signed it off. The matter was settled, and Esther Vane was free to go where she chose. Alderman countered that Pike did not have the authority to unilaterally close what had been secured to him. Boone countered that if Alderman had a complaint it was with Pike, not with him or with Esther, and he was welcome to take it up in a courthouse. None of which was going to resolve anything, and both men knew it. The real conversation was happening in tone and in the air between them. in the quality of Boone's stillness and the way he had not once, through any of this, moved his hands or raised his voice or looked anywhere but at Alderman's eyes. "You think you can talk your way out of 4 guns?" Alderman's voice had taken on an edge. "I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake. There's a difference." Alderman laughed, short and dismissive. He looked at the Foss brothers. "You hear that? One clear chance to turn around. That is what I mean by saving you. I am not what you think I am, and this is not the ground you want to die on." Alderman wanted to know who he was then. Boone gave him just the first name, and then one more word, a place name, the name of a town in New Mexico territory that anyone in the lawless territories would have recognized by 1883 the way you recognize the name of a hurricane after it has been through a country. The Gray Rider knew it. His hands went very still on the reins. He looked at Alderman with an expression that was not quite panic, but was not far from it. Vernon Foss knew it. He let the rifle settle back across the saddle without touching the lever. Alderman didn't know it personally, but he could read the faces of the men beside him, and what he read there rearranged his certainty into something that looked, around the eyes, very much like doubt. "I have no quarrel with you personally. Esther Vane's debt is clear. She is free. You ride back tonight, this is done. Everybody goes home with their health. That is the offer." The silence stretched out long and taut. A hawk circled overhead, cutting slow arcs in the hot air, unhurried by anything going on below. The Gray Rider turned his horse. Jack Foss looked at his brother, looked at Alderman, looked at Boone, and turned. Vernon Foss sat a moment longer, working something over, and then he turned too. Alderman sat his horse for another 30 seconds. He was chewing something, anger or calculation or pride, working it behind his teeth. Then he pulled the horse's head around and rode. None of them looked back. Esther came down off the limestone and stood beside Boone and watched the dust settle where 4 riders had been. She said what both of them were thinking. Some of them would be back. Boone agreed and broke it down. The Gray Rider wouldn't come back. The Foss brothers probably wouldn't. Alderman would need a day or 2 to convince himself he could still do it, and then he would need more men and a plan. She asked what he had put to them. Just his name and a place, he said. She pressed, "What place?" He was quiet for a moment. She could see the decision moving through him. In 1877, there was a town named Millhaven in New Mexico territory. A man named Boone walked into a dispute between a mining company and a group of settlers. 12 men came to force the settlers off their land. 7 of them walked away. Esther was quiet. He was not proud of it, he said. The ones who died were not the worst of the 12. That was usually how it went. The truly bad ones had enough sense to let the ones who were not quite as bad take the risks. He had spent a long time since then trying to find situations where nobody had to die. It didn't always work. "But sometimes it does," she said. "Sometimes it does." She handed him back the Winchester. He slid it into the scabbard. They stood for a moment looking at the empty horizon, and the quiet between them was a different kind of quiet than the silence in Pike's trading post. That silence had been held breath. This one was the exhale after. She reminded him that he had said he was going roughly the same direction, and asked how long roughly the same direction lasted. He looked at her, and there was something careful in his expression, the way a man looks when he is deciding whether to say something honest or something kind and cannot tell which will serve better. As long as it needs to. She nodded. They packed what little there was and moved on. They came to a small settlement named Cutter's Ford that evening. 8 buildings, a well, a blacksmith, and a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Parham, who charged fair prices and had only 2 requirements of strangers. Could you pay, and would you be trouble? Boone could pay, and neither of them was going to be trouble. They ate at Mrs. Parham's table with 2 miners heading north and a circuit preacher heading west. The food was plain but hot, and there was enough of it, which in that country was the basic definition of generosity. After supper, Mrs. Parham showed Esther to a room at the back with a real bed and a window that faced east. Esther sat on the edge of that bed and felt the stillness of a room with no threat in it, and it was so unfamiliar that it took her most of an hour to let herself sleep. Boone slept in the stable loft. He preferred the exits. Over coffee the next morning, Esther laid out what she expected Alderman to do, methodically and without embellishment. The way someone goes through a problem they have been turning over all night. Alderman would go back to Pike. Pike would tell him what he had found out or guessed about Boone. Then Alderman would decide if what he stood to gain was worth what he stood to lose. His gain was reputation, the face he needed to keep in front of his men and in front of the county. His loss was his life, potentially, or at least his health. Alderman would come with more men, she concluded. The name from New Mexico had scared him more than it had turned him around, and a man like that spent his fear building a larger response. More men, a better plan, a night approach. They needed to be ready. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The morning light was coming up yellow and thin through the window. Then she put the hard question directly. He could ride west today and be clear of all of it. It was her Alderman wanted, not him. Boone looked at her with something in his expression she had not seen from a man in a long time. Not pity, not desire, not calculation. Just a simple and complete refusal. $15 on that counter meant he was in this until it was finished. She nodded slowly. Then she surprised him by laying down her own term. They would do it together. She was not waiting somewhere while he handled her problem. That was not how she intended to live. He looked at her across the table. Did she always argue with people who tried to help her? Only when they're trying to turn me back into the person I was at Pike's Post, waiting behind the counter, being managed. Whatever conclusion he reached settled in his expression as something that looked like respect. Fair enough. They spent 2 days at Cutter's Ford, and during those 2 days everything the story required was quietly arranged. Boone found the geography useful. There was a narrow pass about 3 miles south of the settlement where the road from Sutter's Crossing necessarily came through, with limestone walls on both sides and a single clear line of approach. He walked it twice, morning and afternoon, reading the ground the way a man reads it when he's done reading and moving on to geometry. He found the positions he wanted: 2 high points on the eastern wall, a low depression behind a rock cluster on the western approach, a scatter of cedar that would hold a man's silhouette in the dark. He did not set the traps yet. He just knew where they would go, what they would do, and how much time they would buy. Esther spent part of both days with Mrs. Parham, who had the kind of plainness that was really precision. Nothing wasted, everything accurate, and she found it more useful than comfort. She spent the rest of her time sharpening her knife on a whetstone borrowed from the blacksmith and thinking through what she knew about Alderman, his habits, his vanity. the way his face had moved when Boone's words landed. A man like Alderman could not bear to return to his own territory empty-handed, which meant he would come, and he would come with enough men to feel certain, and being certain would make him careless. This was a door. On the second afternoon she rode out to the pass with Boone, and he showed her what he had in mind, standing at the western position and laying out the geography. If they came at night, which he expected, some of them would split to come around. The western position was where they would split. There was no other route that made tactical sense. He would hold the eastern point. She took in the layout and said plainly that she would be at the western position. He had the same expression as when she first took the Winchester, not quite surprised, but something being recalculated. He went through it methodically. The signal, 3 space clicks of stone on stone, which would carry clearly in still night air. The priority targets, the horses first when possible, because it slows everything without putting a man on the ground permanently. The fallback position, if the approach changed. He did not soften any of it, and she did not want him to. She asked 2 sharp questions about the angle of the eastern point and the timing, and then said she understood. Riding back in the long afternoon light, she asked whether he was afraid. Not of them, he said. He was afraid of making a mistake that got her hurt. She absorbed this. It was the most honest thing anyone had put into plain words around her in a very long time, and it landed somewhere behind her breastbone in a way she had not expected and did not entirely know what to do with. "Then don't make a mistake," she said. "That's the plan." They came on the second night, and they came with 8 men. Boone had estimated 4. The number told him that the name from New Mexico had scared Alderman more than it had turned him, and that Alderman had spent his 2 days in town collecting courage from other men, which was the sort of courage that goes thin fast in the dark. Boone had been lying in the eastern position for 2 hours, still and patient. He heard them at midnight. The careful sound of horses moving slowly, which is louder than horses moving freely, because riders working to keep them quiet override the animal's natural rhythm and produce a particular muffled, irregular sound that carries on still night air. He clicked the stone once. After 3 seconds, from across the pass, came the answering click. She was there. He counted shadows moving through the pass below. 8 riders, spread across the width of the approach, moving in a shallow wedge with Alderman at the back. 2 had rifles across their saddles. The gray rider was not among them. The gray rider had made his calculation and stuck with it. The first trap was a tripwire at knee height on a horse, strung between 2 cedar posts at the narrowest point of the pass, with tin cups and a cowbell on the line. When the lead horse hit it, the clatter was enormous in the silence, a flat, ringing cascade of sound that startled all 8 horses simultaneously, and in the 30 seconds of confusion that followed, several things happened at once. Boone put 2 rounds into the ground in front of the lead riders, not at them, ahead of them, close enough to throw rock chips. In the dark, with spooked horses and sudden noise, 2 rounds into limestone sounded like 10. From the western position, Esther worked the lever of the Winchester and put a round into the dirt between 2 horses on the left flank. Her shot came from an angle none of them had anticipated, and in the scramble to locate the new source, the group's structure collapsed entirely, men pulling horses in different directions, the wedge dissolving into a confused scatter. "Alderman," Boone called, from a position that made his voice seem to come from everywhere at once. "You've got 8 men and I've got 2 positions, and you do not know how many guns. This is as far as it goes." A rifle discharged from below, wilded into the rock above him. The shot of a man shooting at sound. He did not return it. "The woman is clear. Her debt was paid. Whatever you were told, it is finished. You ride back tonight, this is done. Nobody goes home explaining anything to anybody." From below came Alderman's voice, ragged and loud. "You can't hold 8 men." "I am not holding 8 men. I am holding a pass. There is a difference. You want to find out the hard way? Start moving forward." The chaos had settled somewhat. The horses were calming from frightened to merely anxious. He could hear men talking in low, urgent voices. The kind of conversation that happens when a plan has come apart, and the men in it are recalculating in the dark. Boone's full name, the New Mexico version, came up in that conversation, and the whole quality of it shifted. A long moment, a very long moment. Then Alderman's voice, flatter than before, something gone out of it. "Back, take them back." They held position for 2 full hours after the sound of the horses faded. Boone circled wide and slow to check that the pass was genuinely clear and not a feint. The kind of thing a cautious man does when he has been right about people before, and knows how easy it is to be right and still get killed. He came back to the western position. Esther was standing with the Winchester in both hands, and the hammer not yet let down. She was still ready. Clear. She lowered the hammer, set the rifle against the rock, sat down. He sat beside her, and for a while they just listened to the sounds the dark makes after something has been in it and gone, the way it reconstitutes itself, the insects coming back, a distant creek resuming its quiet business, the night taking back its own. The practical question first: would they come back? Boone broke it down. Not those men. Alderman would need a new story about why he didn't push through, and once he picked it and believed it, he would be done. He needed to save his face, and what tonight had given him was a way to do it. He tried. He was outnumbered. He made a reasonable decision facing a man he should not have come after. He could live with that. And Pike. Pike had no muscle without hired men. Without Alderman and Reese. He was just a man with a ledger. Take the ledger apart, and he was nothing. She turned that over for a moment, then asked what takes a ledger apart. There was a marshal in Fort Stockton named Cordell, one of the few in that territory Boone would trust with a problem like Pike's. He could put everything in writing: the setup, the names, the numbers, the specific arrangements with aldermen and the whited spread. Not a perfect case, but a case. He would testify if needed, though it meant passing back through country he had been avoiding. She was quiet for a long time. The sky had gone pale gray at the east edge, the first suggestion of dawn. "I want to be the one who delivers it," she said. "Whatever you write down, I want to carry it in myself. I want to be the one who files the complaint." That is exactly what should happen. She looked at him in the early gray light. The measuring quality she had worn since the counter at Pike's post was still there. Some of it would always be there. She had learned too much for it not to be. But something else had entered the look. Something quieter and more settled. Like a person who has found north and can start walking without checking over her shoulder every 3 steps. "All right, I'll do that." They sat together while the light came up, that pale desert light that starts at the east and moves slowly across everything and makes the ground look like it was just washed clean overnight. 3 days later, in Fort Stockton, Esther Vane walked into the marshal's office alone, asked for Cordell by name, and when he came out she put Boone's written statement on his desk, along with a full account of her own, and she did not hurry, and she did not look uncertain, because she had spent 6 weeks learning what it felt like to be something with no say in where it went, and she had decided that was the last time in her life that would be true. The case against Hollis Pike took 3 months to assemble, and 1 afternoon to present to the territorial judge, who had been hearing about Pike's arrangements for years, and was grateful to finally have something in writing. The ledger was produced as evidence. Pike, apparently, was as precise about self-incrimination as he was about everything else. The whited spread lost its operating license. Chet Alderman paid a fine significant enough to change the scale of his operation considerably. The Foss brothers had been smart enough to be somewhere else when the marshals came, and smart enough to stay there. Hollis Pike spent 4 years in a territorial prison in El Paso. He kept a precise and immaculate cell. Esther Vane was teaching school in Bracketville by the following spring. She had gotten the position partly because the woman who ran the school knew the dressmaker she had originally been traveling to see, and partly because Esther had the kind of directness and patience that children respond to, and that most adults find a little alarming. She was teaching 12 students in a 1-room building with a dirt floor and 4 windows, and she was very good at it. She kept a hunting knife in her desk drawer. She had never needed it. She kept it sharp anyway. Boone rode west out of Fort Stockton on a Tuesday morning in September, and the road he took was the one that led eventually nowhere he had been before. He had filed his statement, had his conversation with Cordell, done what needed doing. Before the marshal came back from his office, he and Esther had stood in the street outside for a few minutes. She pointed out that he didn't have to come back for the filing. He had said he was in it until it was finished, and she wanted to know whether it was finished. He thought about it. For this piece of it, yes. She put out her hand. He took it. Her grip was dry and direct, the grip of someone who has made up her mind about you and is at peace with the conclusion. Take care of yourself, Boone. You too, Esther. He rode out without looking back, which was his habit. But I was there, partner, or near enough, and I can tell you that he rode a little lighter than he had ridden in some time. Not happy exactly. Some things do not clean up that simple, but lighter. Like a man who did one thing right and let the debt of it settle into the account where it belonged. There are 100 men like Boone in the stories I carry, and most of them you will never hear about, because the thing they did was not loud enough for a story. Not a raid on a gang, not a sheriff ridden out of town, not a spectacular final confrontation that makes it into the dime novels. Just a man who put $15 on a counter at the right moment and then stayed until the staying was done. I think those men matter more than the loud ones. I do. The loud ones get the songs and the penny papers. The quiet ones get the actual work done. $15 and a willingness to be in someone else's trouble. That is all it was. And it was enough. Now let me tell you what I have learned in all the years I have been carrying stories like this one, and you can take it for whatever you think it is worth. People have a way of deciding what something costs before they know the price. Esther did it the moment Boone set that money on the counter. She was right to do it. Every woman in her position learns that skill or pays for not having it. Boone did it too, in his own way. He decided what the transaction cost him before he knew whether any of it would mean anything at all. What surprised them both, I think, is that the real cost was not money and was not danger. The real cost was patience. The patience to let the other person be who they were, suspicious and careful and ungiving, without requiring them to be grateful or easy or ready on your schedule. Boone did not need Esther to trust him. Esther did not need Boone to be a hero in the way heroes get performed for an audience. They just needed to go the same direction for a while and not require anything of each other beyond what was genuinely there. Your past may explain you, partner, but it does not have to define you. Esther Vane walked out of Pike's trading post with nothing but a flour sack, a knife, and a piece of paper with a line through her name, and by the following spring she was teaching 12 children everything they needed to know about what comes next. The line through your name can be the beginning if you let it be. There is real darkness in this world, and I have seen enough of it over these long years to speak with some authority. The real darkness is not evil men. Evil men are almost the easy part, because you can name them and face them and in the best circumstances bring them in front of a judge with a precise and incriminating ledger as Exhibit A. The real darkness is the silence around the evil men. It is the 20 people who knew what Pike's ledger meant and said nothing. It is the arrangement, the habit, the commerce that runs on everyone agreeing not to say what they all can plainly see. Boone understood this. He had been part of that silence once, in a place and a time he was still working off. It is the thing about him that was never going to let him simply ride past Sutter's Crossing without putting something on that counter. He was not a good man in the simple sense. He had blood on his hands from Millhaven, and he knew it, and it did not go away because he put $15 down. But he was a man who was trying, and in that trying there was something, a discipline, a refusal, that I have watched a lot of men over a lot of years, and I want to say it plain, it is rarer than it looks. Try, partner. When it costs you something to intervene, try anyway. Not because it fixes everything, not because it erases the times you stayed quiet, but because the woman at the counter is counting. She is always counting. And what you do in that moment matters more than you will probably ever know, because she is going to carry it somewhere, and sometimes she is going to use it to build something. Esther Vane built a school, 12 children, a dirt floor, 4 windows, a hunting knife in the drawer. Keep your powder dry out there, friends, and your soul honest. Until our trails cross again, partner. Friends, the story you just heard, he paid $15 to stop them selling her like cattle, is a work of fiction. The characters, events, and locations are entirely invented for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons living or dead or to actual events is coincidental. This content was produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence. If this story meant something to you tonight, please subscribe and leave a like. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is. And if you know someone who loves a good story from the Old West, send this one their way. This has been the Nameless Gunslinger. Good night, partner.